Πιο παλιά ο κόσμος επαφιόταν στο μαντίο των αδελφών ή σε γυάλινες σφαίρες προκειμένου να πληροφορηθεί τα μελούμενα. Στις ημέρες μας, αυτό το ρόλο παίζουν και καλύπτουν μεταξύ άλλων οι futurists. Ένας τέτοιος, ο Matthew Griffin, Exponential Technologies Expert, ιδρυτής και διευθύνων σύμβουλος του 311 Institute, μιας συμβουλευτικής εταιρείας Deep Futures, θα μας πλοηγήσει στην επόμενη μέρα της ιδιωτικότητας των δεδομένων. Ποιες οι σταθερές, οι προκλήσεις και οι ευκαιρίες? Mr. Griffin, good morning from Athens. How are you?
Yeah, doing well. How are you?
Fine, thank you. I'm waiting to hear all the knowledge that you're going to give us right away.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So, yeah, thank you for the introduction. Shall we, if we kick off? Hi, everyone. I hope you're all well. My name is Matthew Griffin, but I'm the CEO and founder of 311 Institute. So, as mentioned, we're a futures and deep futures think tank. Basically, we work globally. And actually, basically, as we start talking about the future of privacy, it's one of my... It's probably one of my favorite, but also least favorite topics. It's one of my favorite topics because I think that we all have a right to privacy. But then it's also one of my least favorite topics because increasingly privacy is a myth. So I'm going to go and kick into the presentation. So when we think about the exponential future, things today basically are very, very different to what they were, say, 10, 20, 30 years ago. If you think back to the 1990s and the 1980s, there wasn't really any concept basically of online. Your privacy basically really sort of stopped when you left the front door. You could still keep an element of privacy basically when you were sort of walking around the streets and everything else. And really the only thing that people would be able to snoop on from an online and digital perspective would have been your emails or your telephone calls, those sorts of things. Nowadays, though, basically we have a flurry of exponential technologies basically that are really helping, to be honest, companies basically push the boundaries about how they engage with us, how they find things out about us, as well as governments and all these other sort of organizations as well. So on the right-hand side of this screen, you'll see sort of around, well, sort of 7 or 8 exponential technologies. Today, basically, we are in this state where as all of these new technologies come through, particularly artificial intelligence, we'll have a chat through that. The things that we can do with technology, basically, to erode people's privacy. And actually not just erode privacy, but actually find a lot more than you think about them, is absolutely insane. So this is my starburst. Basically, I track over 450 emerging technologies, but when you combine these technologies together, that's when you really get next generation products and innovations. And the one that we care about on this wheel is actually the sensor piece. Well, the artificial intelligence piece, which is in blue. So artificial intelligence and machine vision, those are things basically that we should definitely be paying a lot more attention to from a privacy perspective. And then getting it right. And then when we have a look at sensors, of course, being able to watch someone like myself basically on a webcam as we are today, that's one thing. We can do a lot to erode my privacy basically just via a webcam. And I'll show you what I mean by that. But increasingly, basically, when we have all of these different sensors, coming through, these sensors are great at converting essentially analog information into digital. Once we convert analog or just standard environmental information basically into binary, that's it. That opens the door basically on the privacy Pandora's box. So there are 2 types of privacy, really, I think. You have online privacy and you have offline privacy. So when we have a look at online privacy, no one ever reads the privacy document. Online privacy is dead, died a very long time ago. Basically, it's a myth, it's a legend, it's like unicorns. We all know basically that as soon as we go online, that's it, every single thing basically that we do basically is monitored, tracked. all of our data is not just collected, but it's aggregated, it's analyzed. All these companies build different profiles on us. From an online perspective, there is nowhere to hide. Basically, if you guys basically gave me 2 pieces of information, such as your name and maybe location or the place where you work or whatever it happens to be, I could probably find out a huge amount about you. If you have a look at companies like Facebook, for example, typically they seem to take around over 450 data points. And it's just anything and everything. When you start joining all these different data points together, you can create a really quite accurate profile, both from a psychological and a behavioral perspective, on any individual anywhere. And again, that we're not just profiling you. We are trying to identify the friends that you hang out with, basically on your Facebook page, on your Instagram, on your Twitter, your Snapchat, in your photos or whatever it happens to be. It's called the N-1 philosophy. You are kind of the aggregate of your friends. If you're a very well-intentioned, charitable person, you're probably going to hang out basically with well-intentioned, charitable people. And so what your friends do and your friends' behaviors are also sucked up basically in this massive privacy vacuum cleaner basically that we have online. And all this data is being scraped. But ultimately, when we start having a look basically from a company perspective, companies ultimately care about trying to profile you as an individual so they can figure out what makes you tick, what behaviors basically you exhibit, basically whether you are someone that they should loan money to, whether or not basically you are predisposed basically to having any form of cancers or whatever it happens to be in your family, from a life insurance perspective, the type of job that you do, basically the type of place that you live in, the neighborhood that you live in, basically all the demographic information associated from that. But as I mentioned, basically, when we have a look at webcams and CCTV, the webcam that I'm looking at now, if we combine artificial intelligence and machine learning into this webcam, we have companies out of China and Israel that are able to detect your personality, your character, your predisposition to criminality. And these are all with sort of 86% accuracy. You can also tell whether or not you're lying with a 99% accuracy. So now basically increasingly these systems, these biometric systems, are finding their way into hiring systems. So for example, as I sit here, these cameras are incredibly sensitive. They can detect, and as well as the microphones, they can detect the quibble in my voice. Am I lying? Am I nervous? They can detect the skin flushes in your skin to see whether or not, to figure out your heart rate, your palpitations, whether or not you're sweating. And from a hiring perspective, or for whatever other purposes we want to use these things for, but from a hiring perspective, I can actually determine the likelihood, basically, of how you would behave, basically, if we employed you. Are you the type of character that we would like within our company? Because if you're asking me questions and my skin response, my skin is flushing at a particular rate, bearing in mind these cameras can sense a lot more than just the visible spectrum. Same with microphones. Microphones can detect very low tones, very high tones. They can also detect basically whether you're getting ill. These cameras as well, basically, when you start combining with other machine learning systems, just by looking at this webcam, these systems can tell basically whether I have an undiagnosed genetic disorder. Now, if you're a hiring company, you can have a scoreboard and a dashboard basically on your system that says this guy's great. However, he has this genetic condition, and that might push our health insurance up. So do you hire them or don't you? We can do a lot more basically with the technologies that we have on the truck today than you could ever possibly imagine. Now, as we start having a look at offline, typically we think that we have offline privacy. When you close the door at home, basically, and pull the curtains, and when you disconnect yourself from the internet, for example, basically that no one can actually figure out who you are, what you're doing, or analyze you. But you're wrong. So on the one hand, we now have commercial space-based satellite systems in low Earth orbit that have a 12-inch resolution. These systems, basically, these are essentially satellite constellations. They're active now. Basically, they are provided by commercial companies. You can go off and get a contract with that commercial company to download the streaming data if you want. These systems can actually identify you from space. In addition to that, basically, they can actually monitor in the entire Earth, basically in real time. These systems are increasingly being called TiVo for Earth, because you can fast forward and rewind everything that happens on the planet, basically within a 12-inch resolution. And new systems are coming through with a 3.5-inch resolution. And then, of course, when you have a look at government-based spy satellites, they're way ahead of this, basically from a resolution perspective. They've been able to read basically the newspaper that you're reading on a park bench for a very long time. So we're being surveilled from space. In addition to that, we have new persistent drones. Basically, we have persistent drones now over Boston and a variety of different cities. These were deployed basically for the Olympic 2012 Games in Rio. Just as space-based satellite systems can record and see what you are doing from space, these systems get closer. They are called TiVo for cities. So you can literally track and identify people basically within a cityscape. And if you wanted to, you could follow them basically day in, day out. So we're being tracked from the skies. These typically sit at anywhere between about 2,000 to about 30,000 feet in the air. And they're becoming increasingly common, mainly because the cost of drones is falling, but also the optical technologies that these platforms use has been refined, basically, and improved significantly. When we have a look at CCTV, so now we come down to the street level. Just as I said about the webcam, if you have artificial intelligence and machine learning, basically in a CCTV camera, not only can they see where you are, not only can they use facial recognition to identify you, but we can use touchless biometric systems to get you to grab your fingerprints from anywhere between about 100 to 200 meters. In addition to that, basically, if we can detect you from your gate, if you are covered, if you have masks, like a lot of the protesters have recently, we can still identify you, and though with a 80% accuracy. When you start combining traditional CCTV systems basically with new hyperspectral imaging systems go all the way from typically sort of X-ray to ultraviolet light. We can do all sorts of things again. Now, in America, basically, there are now some laser systems that the US DoD have produced that allow different people within the military to point a laser at you, and it can tell whether or not it's you because it uses something called photoacoustic technology. It will read your heartbeat. These systems are already here. As I say, when you think about the different ways that we can identify you, track you, analyze you, erode your privacy, we are way beyond anything and everything basically that the regulators sort of monitor today. When we start having a look at the devices basically that we hold, our smartphones are packed full of sensors, accelerometers, GPS sensors. So we know that we can be tracked when we're using different applications, and these companies can track us and analyze us based on what applications we're using, et cetera, et cetera. But if I hold my phone at a particular angle, my typing speed, the number of times that I pick my phone up can actually indicate depression. So these systems are increasingly being used to identify people who are at risk of suicide, depression, all kinds of things. In addition to that, from a privacy perspective, we can now use the camera that you are looking at me through, combine it again with machine learning and artificial intelligence, and you can tell whether or not I have pancreatic cancer, because if my eyes are yellow and my skin's a particular color, I'm likely to have pancreatic cancer. We can use the accelerometers and artificial intelligence in these phones, and I can do this, and you can tell whether or not I'm at risk of heart disease. I can talk into the microphone And artificial intelligence can analyze my voice patterns, my tone, my intonation, the vocabulary that I use to determine basically whether I have ADHD, PTSD, depression, the onset of Alzheimer's, and all these sorts of things. In addition to that, you can use this same microphone to tell whether or not I'm getting ill before I get ill. So as you sort of probably all know, when you start getting a cough, your voice changes, gets a little bit deeper. These systems, as I mentioned earlier, basically they don't just pick up what you're hearing now, they pick up the higher pitches and the lower pitches. Some companies basically are actually using ultrasound in stores to identify you, because when you walk past a store, your phone basically is triggered by an ultrasound. So an application in your phone is triggered by an ultrasound sort of noise, and they can figure out where you're going. So this is all just the tip of the iceberg. When we start talking about things like home assistants, Google Home, Alexa, they are on all the time. They aren't just necessarily listening basically when you're calling them or asking them a question, but if you're moving around the kitchen, they know basically what time you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner because they can hear the cutlery going. They know basically if you have a dishwasher. Again, we can use those same vocal sort of traits I mentioned on the last slide to figure out basically if you're ill. So when you're talking to Alexa, increasingly Alexa will be able to diagnose your emotional and mental state. And Alexa could then say, I think you sound a little bit depressed. Is there anything I can help you with? By the way, I'm going to play some nice music for you. So they can also profile you based on education, because the way that you talk, how you talk, the speed you talk, the vocabulary that you use will indicate that you're in a particular type of demographic, basically from a background perspective. In addition to that, basically we now have companies who are taking our voices. They aggregate all of our voices together, and they are now starting to make your face using artificial intelligence. So I might sound like somebody who's in Britain. I might sound as though I have a particular sort of racial background. And these systems, again, we are already starting to use people's voice prints alone to recombine a photo of them and figure out what they look like. This is, you can Google all this stuff. Basically, this is nuts. But this is here. If you want details, just reach out. So when we start talking about wearables, we now have technology that is on us. These wearables are detecting everything from our cortisol levels, our galvanic responses, and all sorts. They can track our activities. They can track our posture. Again, just like my smartphone, basically, when depending on how I'm holding it, they can detect the posture, how I'm walking. So, am I depressed? If my posture is hunched and I'm shuffling, maybe I'm depressed and upset. They can obviously track location. They can geotag you in a whole variety of different ways. We can monitor stress as well. And again, this has got benefits because on the one hand, all these systems know so much about us increasingly that they can say, we think you feel stressed. Should we make an intervention? But then similarly, basically, a lot of these different ways these different things can be weaponized. So there are benign uses, but there are also non-benign uses. When we have a look at TVs, again, when you combine a camera in a smart TV and the microphone, when you're sitting in front of it, it can figure that you are disengaged. If you're watching a movie and you're slumping on the sofa, it can figure out that that's probably the wrong movie for you to watch, and it can start putting up a new movie. The things that these systems are able to aggregate and understand about us is absolutely crazy. There is no hiding place.
Mr. Griffin, we have around a minute roughly.
Yeah, that's fine. We're almost there.
Okay, thank you.
When we have a look at things like Roombas and vacuum cleaners, basically they're going around your house. They're figuring out the shape and style of house basically that you live in and sending that back to the cloud. When we have a look at Wi-Fi, I don't need to take a photo of you or put you in front of a camera to figure out your emotional state, your health, basically your wellness, basically all these other things. I can put, thanks to MIT, I can push an artificial intelligence firmware update to your Wi-Fi router, and I can turn your Wi-Fi router into a millimeter wave sonar-like device. That millimeter wave sonar-like device essentially creates a scan of you, your home, everything in your home, and then that can be recompiled. So it can figure out basically that whether or not you're taking your medication by the way that you walk, you know, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, for example. And then what's next? Sensors basically in your self-driving car. All of the sensors I'm talking about here, pack them in a car. Your car is no longer private. We're monitoring everything: your health, your wellness, your emotional state, your background, your origin, your capabilities and abilities. And as for what's next, well, DNA. The cost of profiling DNA basically has dropped substantially. So now you can send your DNA basically to companies like Nestle over in Japan. They will analyze your DNA basically, and they will actually 3D print particular foods for you tailored to your DNA. In addition to that, these genomic databases are also being opened to healthcare insurers and insurance companies as well. Are you predisposed to getting a particular type of cancer? Should we insure you? As I say, the regulators basically are miles behind basically all of these different technologies, but these technologies are here today. And then that's it from me. So I hope basically I haven't intruded on your own privacy basically too much. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. So lovely, I say seeing you all, but thank you very much for the invite. And it's lovely being with you all.
We thank you for the great chunks of knowledge that you gave us, Mr. Griffin, and hope you have a rest of a great day.
Yeah, excellent. Likewise. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. You too. Φτάσαμε στο σημείο που θα ακολουθήσει ένα networking break. Εκεί σας επιφυλάσσουμε κάποιες εκπλήξεις, καθώς η πλατφόρμα επιλέγει τυχαία τους παρευρισκόμενους συνεδρίου και τους φέρνει κοντά για 4 λεπτά, κάτι ως ένα άτυπο blind speed date. Παράλληλα, βέβαια, αν θέλετε να επιλέξετε εσείς το στέλεχος ή το άτομο με το οποίο θέλετε, το σύνεδρο με το οποίο επιθυμείτε να πραγματοποιήσετε μια βίντεο κλήση, θα επιλέξετε την επιλογή People και θα τα πούμε ξανά εδώ στις 12 και 5. Όταν θα μπείτε, επιλέγετε στο session στην επιλογή Panel. Καλή συνέχεια και θα τα πούμε σε λίγα λεπτά.